Imagine, the year is 2019. Inside the suitcase in your hand, there are 4 suits, a laptop, and 9 years of savings. You are walking through the cold, bright corridors of Dubai International Airport, in the country you left behind. Inflation has surpassed 40%. Your money was melting away every morning you woke up. Here, everything looks different. Zero income tax, a stable currency, rule of law, security. You tell yourself, from now on, if I follow the rules, if I work, if I stay within the system, my life will get better. And you believe it, because that is exactly what Dubai promised. A paradise built for those who follow the rules. Now, imagine someone else walking through those same corridors. The date is March 2026. That person is also carrying a suitcase. But this time, they are headed in the opposite direction, toward the exit gate. And on that person's face, there isn't just fear. There is something much heavier, the weight of being wrong. This video is not a war document. This video is an anatomy of a deep-seated fallacy internalized by the middle class across every corner of the globe. If you go to the right place, follow the rules, and trust the system, you will be safe. It is a cold, literary autopsy of how this fallacy can shatter into pieces within minutes in a hypothetical Gulf crisis scenario. Sit down. This is going to take a while. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video. Share your thoughts in the comments. The beginning of the simulation. A morning in March 2026. Risk analysts and geopolitical strategists have been working on a specific scenario for years. How a sudden explosion of tension in the Gulf region would affect the global economic system. This scenario is entirely fictional, but the mechanisms within it are profoundly real. Our simulation begins here. On a fictional morning in March 2026, the annual geopolitical tensions accumulated in the region cross a threshold. In the Gulf, in the waters near the Strait of Hormuz, a serious clash occurs between naval forces. The details of the clash are vague. The intentions of the actors are uncertain. But the result falls into that rare, high-impact category that systematic risk models define as a black swan. 6 a.m., all civilian maritime traffic in the Strait of Hormuz has been halted. There is no official statement yet, but the crude oil markets never sleep. Brent crude futures in London skyrocket by 15% within 15 minutes as algorithmic systems are triggered. This is approximately 40 times the normal daily volatility. 7 a.m. Before New York even wakes up, Asian markets are already bleeding. The Singapore exchange has dropped 8%. In Tokyo, aviation and logistics stocks have been halted by circuit breakers. Conversely, Chinese oil companies in Hong Kong are surging as part of the market bets that the biggest winner of this crisis will be China's dominance over alternative oil routes. And throughout all of this, 2.5 million expats in Dubai are waking up. They turn on their phones. They look at their screens. And they ask the question they have never asked until that moment. Can I get out of here? The truth of geography. An open-air prison. To understand why Dubai becomes vulnerable so quickly, you only need to look at a map. It is a city-state position on the coast of the Gulf region, only 100 kilometers from the Strait of Hormuz. If there is tension on both sides of the strait, this city's connection to the outside world flows through 3 channels, air, sea, and land. And all 3 of these channels are close enough to be pressured simultaneously. In our simulation, the closure or severe restriction of the strait directly hits Dubai's fuel supply chain. While the UAE exports its own oil, refined fuel and industrial products largely arrive by sea. Any restriction in airspace turns one of the world's busiest airports from a transit hub into a void. But the most critical fragility is deeper than logistics. Psychologists define Dubai's vulnerability as the illusion of security. That is, the gap between the moment a place feels safer than it actually is and the moment reality kicks in. The larger this gap, the greater the psychological damage when reality hits. Imagine a population of 2.5 million expats. 90% of these people are foreign nationals. The vast majority do not have a second home or fixed assets in a second country. They have all, in some way, believed that this city was permanent. And in this moment of crisis, they all run for the same door at the same time. The exit. The airport doesn't just jam, it collapses. Not physically, but functionally. Thousands of flights are canceled because airlines halt operations until they can assess route safety. The people waiting at the gates are no longer passengers. They are wealthy expats who have entered a refugee psychology, and that expensive ticket in their pocket is no longer a guarantee. It's a useless piece of paper. This is the true meaning of the open-air prison. Its walls are not steel. They are invisible walls woven from geography, geopolitics, and economic dependency. Hormuz, the jugular vein of the global economy. Here is what you need to know about the Strait of Hormuz. It is the most important waterway in the world. Approximately 20 million barrels of crude oil flow through this narrow passage every day. That is about 20% of global seaborne crude oil. In other words, 1 out of every 5 oil tankers in the world passes through this strait. The narrowest point of the strait is about 34 kilometers. Per maritime rules, inbound and outbound traffic move in separate lanes, each about 3 kilometers wide. Think about it. Such a critical vein of the global energy system is squeezed into a passage only a few kilometers wide. When this strait closes in our simulation, the global economy becomes unable to breathe. But even that metaphor is insufficient. A more accurate analogy is this. Imagine the world's 5 largest economies having a heart attack at the same time, and every road to the hospital is closed. There are alternative routes, like the Cape of Good Hope, but these alternatives require 10 to 14 extra days and have very limited capacity. What happens to the price of crude oil in this scenario? Risk analysts have been modeling this for years. In a short-term closure, a real or perceived restriction of 1 to 2 weeks, it is calculated that crude oil prices could jump 30 to 50%. If the crisis exceeds 2 weeks, speculative pressure and panic buying begin to multiply this figure. In the first 24 hours of our simulation, oil rises from $67 to over $90. This is one of the largest nominal daily increases ever. The market starts talking about $100. Some analysts put a $200 scenario on the table. This number isn't theoretical. It was discussed under real market conditions during the 2008 crisis. Invisible architecture, the mechanism within the system. Now we come to the most important question. A crisis is happening in the Gulf. Why does this matter to an average person in New York? That person doesn't work for an oil company, doesn't operate tankers, and has no investments in the Gulf, but their wallet is burning. This connection is exactly what I define as invisible architecture. The modern economy is an incredibly complex and incredibly fragile network of interconnected systems. Most of the connections within this network are invisible in the daily life of the middle class. But each one is a literal existential pressure point. Think of it this way. The price of oil goes to $100. At first glance, this seems only to affect the gas pump. But in reality, the impact is much deeper and spreads much faster. Shipping costs increase. When shipping costs increase, the price of every product in the supermarket increases. Energy costs increase. When energy costs increase, the production costs of factories increase, which is reflected in prices. Every sector that uses petroleum-derived raw materials, from plastics to medicine, synthetic fabrics to fertilizers, is squeezed at the same time. By the 40th day of the Hormuz crisis in our simulation, annual inflation in the U.S. has doubled analyst expectations. The Federal Reserve is in a dilemma: raise interest rates and suffocate the economy, or keep rates steady and let inflation run wild. There are no winners in either option, only different types of losers. And that rule-following middle-class family in New York, they have a 30-year mortgage, a fixed-rate, safe mortgage. But their life insurance, car insurance, and health insurance premiums are all priced by inflation. Their grocery bill has increased by 40%. And now their savings and bond funds they once considered a safe haven are tanking because the Federal Reserve's rate decision hits the value of those funds a second time. This person did not join a war. They made no geopolitical decisions. They have been following what's happening in the Gulf in the news for 2 weeks, as if it were a distant and abstract reality. But the invisible architecture does not allow for such distance. The system finds them. It comes for their bills. It comes for their bank account. The flight of smart money, exiting the glass towers. In times of crisis, markets reveal 2 different groups of people: The first is a rule-following group. These are passive investors, salaried employees, mortgage payers, people who regularly contribute to retirement funds and trust the system. The second is a group analysts call smart money, hedge funds, family offices, institutional investors, and high-net-worth individuals. The difference between these two groups becomes terrifyingly clear in a crisis. In our simulation, in the minutes the Hormuz crisis breaks out, smart money has already shifted its position because risk models, oil futures, and geopolitical alarm systems, all of these, received the signal before the crisis became public. Hedge funds are long on oil and defense stocks and short on aviation and logistics. Family offices have increased their cash positions and turned to true safe haven assets like gold and the Swiss franc. And these positions make money when the crisis starts. In other words, while the system is collapsing, those in the upper layers of the system profit from the collapse. This is not a moral judgment. This is the mathematical reality of the market. Now, let's return to the glass towers in Dubai. In the first week of the Gulf crisis, what is happening in the corporate offices in these towers? Major investment banks are assessing their operational risks. Many are already activating continuity plans they've had prepared for years. They are rapidly pulling critical personnel out of the region. The offices in Dubai aren't closing, but they are shrinking. The decision-making center shifts to another city, London, Singapore, Zurich. This move happens quietly. No official announcement, no press release, just flight bookings, partial evacuations, and floors and glass towers that are suddenly empty. And who is left behind? Those who do not have the capacity to leave are left behind. Middle-tier expats, unfinished visas, children in school, apartments that can't be sold, companies that can't be closed. These are the people who believe most in the safe haven narrative and are therefore the least flexible. Psychological autopsy, the cost of fallacy. The least discussed dimension of economic crises is the psychological one. Material loss is measurable. The bill arrives, the account is opened, the figure is there. But the psychological cost of being wrong is much harder to measure and often much more devastating. The middle-class expat who believed in Dubai's safe haven narrative didn't just take it as an investment decision. This decision became part of their identity. The story of, I am someone who calculates risks, makes the right decisions, and understands the system was supported by this choice. And when that story collapses, many things collapse with it. In psychology literature, they define the phenomenon as identity-based loss. It is much deeper than an ordinary financial loss, because it impoverishes you not just in terms of money, but in terms of who you are. And here, the darkest truth of the simulation comes into play. The people who suffer the most in a crisis are not those who made the worst decisions. On the contrary, they are the ones who made the most logical decisions within the existing system. The middle-class expat who came to Dubai made a logical decision to escape inflation. They made a logical decision to reduce their tax burden. They made a logical decision to provide a better future for their children. Every step was rational within its own context. But the system is not just the sum of rational individual decisions. And the invisible mechanisms within this system can render individual rationality meaningless. The fact that you followed the rules did not protect you, because when the system changed, the rules changed too. You didn't change, but the ground shifted beneath you. Global repercussions. From Berlin to Lagos, the impact of the simulation does not end in Dubai. The ripples of a Hormuz crisis reach everywhere in a global system. And the form of these ripples changes depending on where they go. But everywhere they hit the middle class. In Berlin, a German engineer works for a renewable energy company. Theoretically, they should be isolated from an oil crisis. But when raw material costs increase, the company's margins narrow, investments are paused and layoffs begin. And this engineer loses a position they thought was secure. In Lagos, a Nigerian textile trader imports raw materials from China. When shipping costs double, this trader's financial model collapses. They cannot get credit because banks have declared a high-risk period. And 10 years of this person's labor evaporates because it was a variable in a geopolitical calculation in Hormuz. In Buenos Aires, an Argentine couple had been saving in euros for months through austerity. When global uncertainty increases, currency markets enter sharp volatility, and the real value of these savings drops dramatically within days. These stories are not separate. They are all different nodes of the same system. An invisible architecture connects all these nodes. When one is shaken, the others tremble. How much each one shakes depends on how integrated that node is into the system and how much capacity for flexibility it has. System autopsy. What is the reality? This simulation is fictional, but the mechanisms within it are not. The Strait of Hormuz is truly the world's most critical energy corridor. This is an indisputable geographical fact. The UAE is truly a country where 90% of the population consists of expats. The fact that oil prices are so sensitive to regional crises has been documented repeatedly with historical data. The 2021 to 2022 container crisis showed the whole world how vulnerable the global supply chain is to shipping costs. Dubai did indeed enter and exit the FATF gray list in the last few years. Its legal framework truly contains some structural vulnerabilities for expats. Passport confiscation, exit bans due to debt, vague definitions of economic crimes. These are documented, real cases. And most importantly, the misunderstanding of the safe haven concept is real. Many people in the world see security as something you can buy by going somewhere. But security is not bought. Security lives in an environment where structural institutions work for you too, where you have rights and obligations toward them, and where the system is responsible to you when you contribute to it. The places closest to this definition are not perfect, but the places furthest from this definition, no matter how shiny they appear, have a weak foundation. The weight of the suitcase. Let's go back to the beginning. The person at the airport. 2026. Walking in the opposite direction. Who is this person? Perhaps someone from Beirut, trying to rebuild their life for the second time. Perhaps someone from Mumbai, who sacrificed for 5 years to provide a better school for their children. Perhaps someone from Nairobi, who moved 3 generations of family savings to the city. This person did not make a bad decision. They are not a bad person. They are simply someone who could not fully understand how a system actually works, that it isn't real, and how that system behaves in a moment of crisis. And this failure to understand is a deeply human thing, because the system is designed not to be understood. This is the strongest feature of the invisible architecture. The mechanisms that feed you are not visible. The mechanisms that threaten you are not visible. Only the result is visible. The bill, the empty account, the canceled flight, the devalued savings. And what we have been telling you throughout this video is this. If you want to understand that result, you need to look at the architecture. You need to look at the invisible. You need to ask yourself, what is my place within this system? Is this system working for me? Or am I working for this system? And when this system comes under stress, where do I stand? The answers to these questions might be uncomfortable, but that discomfort is much cheaper than waiting at the airport with a suitcase. Dubai might not collapse. Hormuz might not close. The events in this simulation might not happen. But you don't need to wait for these events to happen to ask these questions, because the system is always producing something to keep us busy. It feeds us, it distracts us, it makes us believe. And until the moment the crisis knocks on the door, we forget what the weight of the suitcase means. Know your suitcase. Know where you stand. And always, never forget to know where the exit gate is. Thanks for watching.